The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending our Gender Pay Gap Reporting webinar. I'm here today with Ruth Hemingway, who's going to be your speaker for today. Throughout the session, there is the opportunity to ask questions, but to enable the webinar to continue smoothly, we'll be answering those at the end of the webinar. In your GoToMeeting panel, there is a section that you can ask questions in, so please ask those as we go along, and if you have any questions at the end, we'll wrap them up. Equally, if we can't answer all your questions today, then please feel free to email us after the webinar and we will answer them directly. Okay, I'm just going to pass you over to Ruth, who's going to talk to you about gender pay gap reporting.
Hello everybody, thank you for attending today. My name is Ruth Hemingway, I'm one of the HR consultants. Today we're going to be speaking about gender pay gap reporting, and we are going to go through I'll just go through the agenda to start with. Gender pay gap reporting versus equal pay, and an overview of gender pay gap reporting, what it is and how it affects you and what should you be doing to address some of the issues. So we'll go straight into it. First of all, equal pay and gender pay gap are not the same thing. They are very different. The Equal Pay Act from the 1970s, 46 years ago, now has become part of the Equality Act. That talks about same work and equal pay. Awards can be back paid for 6 years, and the cases are complex. We've had a number of cases over the years, mostly from the public sector. Is a cleaner due to the same equal pay as a dustman? There have also been a number of cases related to the supermarkets too. But gender pay gap reporting is a very different thing. You might tick all the boxes of equal pay, but your gender pay gap might be very different. So I'm going to show you a bit of the few of the slides of what gender pay gap actually is. You can see from this that things are getting better, but little change has really taken place since 2010. The CIPD survey said women would have to work an additional 52 days each year unpaid to close the gap. A survey said that just 28% of employers overall and 34% of larger organisations, those with 250 people or more, said their organisation conducted an analysis. This analysis of 292 large companies who track gender pay gap parity found 28.6% of average favour in men. However, 0.8% of this could be attributed to various in seniority, section and function. Gender pay gap, the law and overview. So what do we have coming into force? Section 78 of the Equality Act 2010 includes a power to introduce regulations which require employers of at least 250 employees to publish information to show whether there is a difference in pay between men and female employees. This was not previously implemented. The coalition government, our last government, had hoped that voluntary reporting would be sufficient. There was an introduction of a Think Act report initiative of which 300 employers signed up to it. Unfortunately, only 7 of these actually published a report. Section 147 of the Small Business Enterprise and Employment Act 2015 therefore requires this provision to be brought into force no later than 25th of March 2016. So it is now gone live and we now need to act. The regulations will apply to employers with private and voluntary sectors in England, Wales and Scotland with at least 250 employees as at April each year. Public sector employers are currently excluded, although the government intends that non-devolved public authorities in England will be required to report on their gender pay gap in the future. The regulations set out in detail the information that will be published annually regarding the gender pay gap. Employers have a year in which to prepare and comply. The latest date an employer can start reporting its gender pay gap is 30th of April 2018 based on pay periods as at 30th of April 2017. So, just to recap, private sector employers with relevant employees of 250 or more who work in the UK. But what does relevant actually mean? And that's very important. First of all, it doesn't include workers, so it excludes people like cleaners or support workers on 0-hour contracts, anything that might be contracted out, such as self-employed, and it also excludes LLPs and partners. There is a cynical point of view that says this is men at the top of an organisation. So, key pieces of information, and these are the 5 pieces that are essential. First of all, there's the mean gender pay gap. What is the mean gender between hourly rates between men and women? Then there is the median gender pay gap. What is the difference between hourly rates between men and women? And what is the difference in mean bonus payments? And the bonus payments are going to be the complex ones. The proportion of men and women who receive a bonus over the previous 12 months, and then, and this is the difficult one from a mathematical point of view, what is the quartile between pay gaps and pay contributions per category? So let's go straight into some of these examples. The first one, mean pay gap. First of all, what are people paid in April? We need an hourly pay rate for each employee. Pay is defined as the Office of the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, in an hourly survey of hourly ratings. Note, maternity pay is normal pay, so this will be included. Bonuses are included in April, and we will talk about bonuses shortly. You will need to report on all of these. Most pay slips include everything. What they may also include is overtime pay and include pay in arrears. We need to be careful of that, and we will discuss this shortly. So the mean pay gap included is further to the definition. The definition we need to take account is the hourly rate. So the hourly rate, gross rate of hourly men and women, minus, so it's the men minus the hourly rate of women, times that by 100, and then divide that by the hourly rate of men. That will get us our pay gap percentage. If you pay for monthly, the pay period will be April. If weekly, a fortnight, then the pay period that falls into the 30th of April. Monthly pay period, there is no further explanation at the moment, but it is believed how many hours would be in April. This further is broken down by hours. The regulations state that hourly pay should be calculated divided by weekly pay divided by basic hours. Salary workers, we would have an hourly rate that is simply monthly salary divided by contracted hours or hours actually worked. We do not need to differentiate between part-time and full-time. Using monthly pay for April divided by the average monthly contracted basic hours in April may be consistent and fair, but many salaried employees actually work in excess of their contracted hours. Guidance is also needed on how to calculate hourly pay rates for maternity or sick leave. So, following through an example. I'm not going to read this in detail because we would be here for a while, but you are welcome to have a copy of the slides later in order to look through the detail. But here is an example. We have a typical company where we've worked out what the hourly pay might be, including the mean average for women and the mean average for men. So taking these rates in this example, our mean average works out as 38.01%. Okay, this is the easiest calculation. Next, onto our median pay gap. You will remember the 38.1% because you will see a difference shortly. Onto our mean pay gap. So this looks at the mean average between hourly rates of men and women. Works in a similar example to the previous example. So going back to our same calculations, these are exactly the same as the previous example. We will then find a mean by dividing the number of employees to get the midway point. As you can see here, although the last one was 38.01%, the current one is for 42.86%. This is thought to have the best indicator of the difference since it removes the skewing effect of high and low earners. On to our next statistic. So this is bonuses. This is where the area gets difficult. Traditionally, bonuses often are more for men because they are often based on seniority or through sales, which are traditionally male areas. So you can work out from there, do you have a problem? So we can gather data on the idea of bonuses. It would include profit share, productivity, performance and incentive bonuses, piecework, commission, long-term incentive schemes, and the cash equivalent for these. On to our next item. So this is the pay distribution, and it would be the most difficult to calculate and probably would be most difficult. So you would look at men and women in each quartile. It's not something that we are often used to working out and is shocking for employers. This lists the gross hourly pay for men and women split into 4 categories with an extent of women where often women are overrepresented. So this would be your salary bands. Traditionally, often larger organisations do have salary bands. You would then split it a gender pay gap per salary band. So using our example, these are the same employers with the same employees as our previous example. We can therefore see that we have the quartile pay and split into quartiles. The next difficult bit is how long do we think that it would take to gather this information? The government thinks that this would take somewhere around 13.5 hours to calculate in total, take into account payroll information and HR staff to calculate these figures. Somehow I think that 13.5 hours is a little bit optimistic, and I think it would take most organisations more than this. Essentially, you need to think about this sooner rather than later. To give you an idea, you don't have to produce this in a pie chart, but it is easy to explain. This is the turquoise is for women and the green is for men. We can see there how the different pay gaps might be easier to represent. Okay, so what additional information do we need? What might be sensible to explain? So, not required to provide a statement or explanation of these figures, nor information on any steps provided. Essentially, all you need to do is produce the figures. You don't, by law, have to produce a commentary or narrative to go with it. Some, however, think that it might be a good idea to produce a narrative, and we can go into what that narrative might include shortly. It seems like a good idea to produce that if you have a high gender pay gap. The government has indicated it will be encouraged, but you don't need to do it. While overtime is specifically excluded from the scope of the regulations, for those sectors where overtime is a significant element, you might want to include that. Other things that might make the figures look odd are shift allowances, anyone on maternity leave receiving maternity pay, and that might include adoption pay or shared parental leave, and any partners or LLPs who are excluded and who are high earners. You might want to include sector detail. For example, are you working in a sector with a traditionally wide pay gap? And would you look at other information such as including trade unions, shareholders, or the media? You need to consider who would look at this, such as your employees, and what they might make of it. From that, we will talk about the implications of this later on. So, where we would publish is within our website. We might sign this every three years. We have to find this. It must be signed by a senior person, and it must be in English, and it will then be uploaded onto a government-sponsored website with the idea that the government can then look and report on this across UK. Failure to comply with this. Well, this is where there is no teeth within the regulations, because there is technically no penalty for doing this, which is a little bit surprising given the fact that most employment law does have some kind of penalty. There is no penalty with regard to this. It is, however, a good idea. It would be a good idea because it affects your reputation, any recruitment you might do, any pressure from the media in order to provide this. Okay, so what actions next? First of all, we need to check out the headcount for what is the headcount. So does your headcount fluctuate? As of the 30th of April, chosen in an attempt to avoid seasonal fluctuations in the workforce. Large groups of organisations may find they are not subject to regulations, and as figure is for a subsidiary. No obligation to aggregate employees in an individual subsidiary or servicing company. Check payroll systems. Most may need amending in order to provide this information, especially with information on bonuses. You may need to add in elements of pay which may be removed, such as overtime or pay arrears. You may need to remove workers or LLPs or partners from the list, and there will be a need to check the hours worked to get an average gross hourly pay. Only when you find out this relevant information for relevant workers, male and female, can you work out the mean and median. This might take some time to work out the gross hourly pay. The Equality and Human Rights Commission considers a significant pay gap as anything more than 5%. To put this into context, the national pay gap is 57%. The bonus payments are included in the calculation of the hourly rate if pay is in April. We delay bonus payments from April to May in order to remove any skewing of the hourly figures. So what next? Keep an eye on your competitors. How well do you compare? Are they even publishing the information? Consider steps to address these. We'll talk about this shortly. And survey your employees. The big thing that we do expect to have is we expect to have potential grievances come out as people see equal pay gap. Therefore, they must assume that that might mean an equal pay. A pay gender gap might assume to be an equal pay gap. So therefore, you may find a rise in equal pay grievances, something that we don't want to encourage. Using the gender equality as a competitive advantage, it is able to do, particularly if you have a good one. You can publish on your website, on your recruitment material. You can look at your competitors and compare yourselves to them, and you can promote yourself as a good place to work. So, the gender pay gap, how do we address these issues? First of all, appoint someone in a senior position to look at this and to address where issues can be, find out where issues can be addressed. We set targets for roles, areas where there is clear underrepresentation. Review your recruitment and promotional data. Review training data and processes. Look at what you can do to address that. Look at working arrangements. Now we find that the big gap is where you've got lots of people who are male in senior positions and lots of people in positions that are junior that are female. So can we look at any flexible working arrangements? Have we got a glass ceiling, or have we got a part-time glass ceiling? Can we therefore look at working arrangements to address that? Can we include more inflexibility within working hours and working roles? Review childcare related benefits for both men and women. It might enhance payments for shared parental leave. What about carers? Can you have flexibility to retain carers? Do you have a long hours culture? Check your competitors. What are they doing? And check your industry, sector in industry. What are they doing? Women over age of 40 are the most affected by the gender pay gap, so can we look at people with that era and that age? So remember, this only applies to our 250 employees currently. We need to start planning now. We need to address, these regulations come in October 2016, but we need to address anything that is coming from April 2016 through to April 2017. So this is live now. So view this in the context of transparency. What can we do immediately? Okay, that's everything. Do we have any questions?
Okay, we have had a couple of questions coming in. The first one is from Mohammed, who's asked, are these rules influenced or initiated by the EU? If so, are they relevant to UK companies since Brexit?
Okay, that is a very important question. These laws are influenced by the EU. They come out of most of our employment legislation comes out of the EU. So that is a very important question. It may be affected. We don't really know at the moment. It is too early to say. But even if it is affected, then we have to consider the fact that whatever happens, it won't be happening in a hurry. We need to look at this immediately because we need to start reporting on this in April next year, and it takes into account April 2016, i.e. the past, to the near future. So even if Brexit does affect it, it won't be happening in the future, and we need to consider it sooner rather than later. Any other questions?
Okay, we have another one from Chris, who's asked, if 0 hours workers are excluded from the calculation, should they be included where they work irregular hours over a period of time?
So that is about regularity and frequency of hours. We do need the regulations do say April. So at the moment, it's just a snapshot in time about April for each year. So that's April 2016, April 2017. At the moment, you don't need to look at the skew of hours throughout the year. It is literally just a snapshot in time that may change in the future. Any other questions?
We have quite a few now to coming in. So we have a couple of questions from Ken. The first one is, before embarking on this process, do we need to think carefully about the risk of creating evidence that could be used against us in an equal pay or discrimination claim, as well as the relevant data protection and confidentiality issues?
Okay, very important question about data protection. With regards to data protection, you won't be providing the information about individuals. You will literally just be providing salaries and whether they are hourly rates and whether they are male and female. And therefore, you only have to consider the fact that the DPA will not be influenced because you aren't breaching anybody's individual data protection.
A follow-on question from Ken is it up to us to identify where men and women are doing equal work, which means work which is broadly similar or is equal value in terms of the demands of the role?
Well, that would apply under the Equal Pay anyway, the Equality Act, what was previously the Equal Pay Act. That would apply anyway and is already in existence. With regard to looking at quartiles, you will need to consider salary bandings and the salaries of people within that salary banding.
So it's not necessarily about the work they're doing, it's how much they're getting paid?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Okay, another one from Ken. If you use 30th April 2016, how can you take steps now to look at areas of concern, or is this for the following year?
Well, you can address things now immediately, and you can, and yes, it might be interesting to address, an important point to address for the next following year, but don't forget, if you've got to report it, if you're looking at reportings from things that have happened in the past, you will have as part of your narrative say, this information has changed because of these things that we have changed, and therefore we expect next year's to not reflect this.
The other things to consider as part of that is if you pay bonuses at any particular month, because that can influence your gender pay gap reporting as well. So that's all the questions we've got from you here today. On the slides you do have both myself and Ruth's email addresses should you wish to reach out to us for any further questions, or indeed if you want to ask for copies of the slides or any other information that you might feel relevant. We have had a mixture of clients and people who are subscribed to our newsletter on this webinar. So thank you all for attending. But once again, if you do want to reach out to us for further information, please don't hesitate to do so. We thank you for your time. Please keep a lookout for future webinars that we're aiming to run over the next couple of months. Thank you very much.